Ready? Welcome back to the Ultimate Homeschool Community Podcast. I'm your host, Tiffany Hernandez. Today we are doing our second session on the ESA Fun Series, and we are super excited to have our guests with us. So today, of course, we have our co-host, which is Kimberly Bennett, and she's with HCN. And then we have Heather, and Heather is with Hope Grove Education Services. And then we have Becky with us with Nonprofit Ed Solutions. Welcome, ladies.
Hi, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're diving into the landscape that is changing right now in education. And of course, that's the school choice funding. And so many of us have heard the terms like ESAs, vouchers, scholarships. And if any of these families are seeing, it is very overwhelming real quick because there's so many different vocabulary terms and not every state has the same options and opportunities. So today we're just going to break it down real simple for what these actually mean, maybe how they overlap, and some of these things, what they could look like for your family or your educational program. So real quick, because we want to make sure we have a few of these definitions somewhat explained, like Heather and I were talking about before, there are some overlap and there are some word or verbiage that is used in certain states when it's not actually that way for the funding. So first, of course, school choice just simply means that families have the ability to choose educational options outside of their assigned school, meaning you can homeschool, you can private school, charter school, you can use co-ops, all of that. Then there's ESAs, which really should be a different word. However, they're called educational savings accounts. And these are state allocated funds that families can use on approved educational expenses. They're really spending accounts, but they say savings accounts. We don't understand all of the ways that the government works, right? Then there's the vouchers. Vouchers are funds that typically go directly towards tuition. So private school tuition, if there's microschools that have been approved as private schools, they would also be able to take those vouchers. Then you have scholarship programs like SGOs or tax credit scholarships. Some of these are typically funded through donations and distributed through nonprofits, but in some states, it's actually how the state is funding their options and opportunities for their students. And then we're even seeing now coming out in 2027 that there is a new federal education tax credit coming that could expand options even further. So there's so many opportunities and options for state funding. But here's the real question, right? What does this actually mean for you and your family? Or if you're a provider, what does that mean? Becky was talking about how, we've got vendors instead of service providers. So there's a lot of vocabulary there. But we're going to get into this and break into a few questions about this with our guests so they can share a little bit of what they've seen. Now, I would love for you ladies to give a real quick overview of just who you are and just a little background about yourself. So that way our guests can understand where you're coming from. And we have Heather here with Hope Grove Education Services. Can you share just a snippet about yourself?
Sure. Okay, so I got into the microschool world from starting a little program in my garage back in 2020 with my daughter. I hired a teacher and split the cost with 3 friends just to solve a childcare problem. I had no idea it would become a full-time private school just a year later. I ended up moving it to a church in downtown, like so many of us do. We look for community spaces to run our programs. I was super insecure about actually teaching in my own school because I didn't have a teaching background. I had a lot of business background. I was running my own hotels and property management. And I ended up turning that program into a nonprofit because to rent from a church, I needed to be a nonprofit. It turned out to be a phenomenal space. I had 15 students. I ended up hiring 2 more teachers, and I ran that for about 4 years in Dunedin, Florida. I became a Step Up Accepting private school. Step Up is one of those ESAs. It's a universal program in Florida, so everybody qualifies just by virtue of being a resident of Florida. There's no income thresholds, and there's higher limits for those with unique abilities or disabilities. So that's my background in the microschool world. And then I've also consulted nationwide with KaiPod. I was a program manager for their Catalyst program. And now I work in ed tech with ABC Mouse. So I help them get all their products on the ESAs across the 21 states that have them so far. So
Awesome.
background. Yeah.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Becky, can you go ahead and let us know what you've been doing at Nonprofit Ed Solutions? Because you've got a very extensive background as well.
Yeah, maybe not quite as much as Heather. I'm impressed.
Well,
So I'm in Oregon. I have 5 kids, kind of really wide age range. So I started homeschooling when my older three, I have a set of 3 boys, they were all like late elementary, middle school ages, and I had babies. I had like a baby and a toddler, and um, so I was thrust into homeschooling a little bit unwilling, and ended up starting a co-op, trying to find connection and ways to get out of the house, because it was really different for us. And that evolved into a co-op that is still running. And then in 2019, we expanded to add a hybrid program. So my focus shifted in 2021, 22. I started offering consulting. I would have people find our website and reach out, because it was right after COVID that we had started our program, and be like, how did you start your program? How are you doing this? Can we use your stuff? And I'm happy to help and love to help, and it was time consuming. So I ended up like slapping together a website, and I had some mentoring with Carol Top, the homeschool CPA. And so kind of conglomerated all of those things, and have been offering consulting work, but mostly I've honed in on helping people navigate the incorporation and the 501(c)(3) aspects of running their nonprofit nationwide. So we make sure it's compliant with their state, and help them navigate that in an affordable way, and make sure that they learn and understand what they're doing at the same time, because you can go pay an attorney or a CPA to do it and have no idea what you did. So we're trying to bridge that gap, to having a healthy business that's operating in a compliant way, where the board members and the founders actually know what they did. So that's what I do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. Yes. Okay. So we have some very extensive backgrounds here in microschooling and in homeschooling in general, which is great because we're starting off some questions to talk about these family issues, not so much issues, but really so they can understand. And so, Heather, can you share with us, for families new to this space, how can they clearly understand the difference between the ESAs, the vouchers, the scholarship programs? Like, which one might best fit their situation? Because I know there's a lot of times it's confusing, but then also, how do I know what my student would need or what's available in my state, if any?
Yeah. All right. So I use Claude for everything now for searching. So I recommend that for searching if it's available in your state, as well as Google, to figure out if you have a universal program, an ESA, a voucher system, or tax credit available. 26 states have the new tax credit available that just came out with the big beautiful bill, and 21 states participate in some sort of voucher or ESA program already. So ESAs are going to be like the universal programs typically, where there's just everybody in the state qualifies for some sort of funding. And the average I see is around 7,500 to 8,000 a student. It varies by county, by age, grade, all of that, and like cost of living in your area. So it can vary widely. Like Miami, I think is, I don't know, 10 or 12,000 right now. And like the county I'm in, it's 7,500 for a fourth grader and up, and 8,200 for K through third. So it can vary quite a bit. And that's just for traditional, like not traditional, but neurotypical students. So then if you have a student with a disability or neurodivergence, they might qualify for a program that within that same ESA, but it's a higher amount. So those programs go from 10,000 up to 25 to 40,000, depending on the state. So it's like, I think 25 to 40,000 is the max for each matrix score. This is for parents that understand IEPs, 504 plans, and matrix scores that deal with getting a special assistance for their children, like one-on-one like RBTs and therapies that they need. So that's why those ones are so much higher, because the funding can be used for all of the therapeutic services. as well as their academic needs, and they can attend part-time private schools or have a tutor come to their home, or go to a micro school. They're really like very versatile. The ones for homeschoolers that are like in the ESA, the universal ESA states, are going to be a little bit more restricted, but they're still pretty open as far as like they can attend a part-time micro school, they can get one-on-one tutoring, they can use it for enrichment. From like my daughter uses it for horseback riding and gymnastics classes, as well as I buy all of her printed and digital curriculum. So there's a lot of variability state by state and program by program.
Right.
I have a great little spreadsheet that I put together right before we started this call. So I'll share that with you guys, where kind of breaks down which states have what. But the biggest states right now are Arizona, Florida, Arkansas, Indiana, Iowa, New Hampshire, North Carolina. These are in Texas. It's just coming on board this year with 100,000 students expected to join that program year one. Florida is the largest population wise. So there's quite a few large ESA states, but then there's the voucher programs, which are just for spending directly to private schools. So you would apply to a certain private school, you get in, and then the state would pay that school for you. Whereas the ESAs, the state is sending you money through an SGO, which is like in Florida, it's Step Up for Students. We used to also have AAA. Some of the older families will remember that. And in the other states, you'll hear Odyssey or Class Wallet. And those are the like middlemen is how I describe them between the state and the families. So they're the ones dispersing the funds to the families, the students' accounts, and then the parent can decide how to use those funds within a system that has approved vendors or providers. Vendors are like ABC Mouse or like Lexia or Zern, all the different learning curriculums, and or your gymnastics teacher. And then providers can be like a tutor, a micro school, any like human basically that you're directly working with, and versus a product. So there's and then you also don't necessarily have to work within that, just that system. You can also, like in Florida anyways, and I think in most of the states, you can apply for reimbursement, where you would submit your invoice from the product that's like approved in the list of ways that you can spend your funds, and you'd submit
Like
it
a
to
printer?
the scholarship. Like what?
Like a printer, or like
Yeah. So
like,
say you bought a printer, some ink, paper, a school desk, anything like that. You just submit the invoice to your scholarship, to the ESA website that you're using. So mine is Step Up for Students, and I submit the invoice, and it's a bit complicated and very confusing sometimes, where they'll approve it really easily, and then the next month for the same exact invoice, kick it back and say it's not approved, and you'll have to adjust the invoice somehow and then resubmit it. So it's definitely not a perfect system yet, but it gets better every year. And the funds are usually dispersed in chunks. They're not usually dispersed all at once at the beginning of the school year. That's what I think shocks a lot of families. They think that they're going to get like $8,000 all at once. And in Florida, it's 25% of the scholarship is dispersed each quarter. In Texas, I think they're going to be doing 50% or no, 25%, and then, or 50% in the beginning of the year, and then another 25 and 25. I think it's like all dispersed by April, whereas in Florida it takes until May, June, I think June. Like it goes from July through June in Florida.
So it's a whole year versus like the school year. Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. So yeah, the funding is definitely dispersed differently in each state, and never all at once from what I've seen. Maybe some of the smaller scholarships, like the I don't know if there's one that's only like $2,000 or $3,000, those might be, but most of these are anywhere from $8,000 to $10,000, or 7,500. Like North Carolina is 7,500. It's and 7,800 for Iowa. So they're all over the place. But yeah, the most important stuff is to look for universal states. Those are the ones that are going to have like anybody that lives in the state qualifies. They're not income limited. Then you have the ones that are based on like income. If they're not universal, there still can be an ESA, like you could still have access to an account with funds like an ESA,
Right.
but you might be limited by income level. So like until 3 years ago, Florida was an income limited state. So you had to be like, I think it was like 200% within the poverty line or something like that. It was pretty high. Like you still earn $100,000 or $115,000, I think, as a family of four.
So, but now it's not that way.
No,
'Cause
yeah, they removed that with HB1. It was 3 years ago. They removed the income limit. So now it's a universal state, meaning everybody qualifies regardless of
Okay.
income. And you get prioritized by income still, but anybody can apply and qualify and get approved.
Okay.
So it's just a matter of
Okay.
like who applies first. It's more of a
So that's
first come, first serve, but also income is prioritized. And you don't, so to prove your income, you can submit your tax return, but you don't have
Right.
to. But if you don't, then you're not going to get prioritized. So
okay.
yeah.
Okay, because that's what I know there was some back and forth going on with Florida this year, especially with families needing to submit tax documents
Yes.
more so because of the influx
Yeah, there's
of
been a
how
huge
many people
influx.
have come in. Okay, so that brings me to the next question about like realistically, what type of services does this benefit for? Like the biggest benefits of using ESA funds to help families afford what they otherwise couldn't afford. Can we talk a little bit about like what generally gets used with these funds? Because obviously we're all pro, going to co-ops and making sure we have services and all of that. But what would you say you see the most of as well with families?
So I'm going to just use my own child as an example. She was very neurotypical. I didn't think we had any special needs or anything. And then all of a sudden this year, she came back with like a bunch of new test results from just getting screened for vision. And now she needs this expensive vision therapy and OT and reading tutoring and all these things that I never expected to need to spend money on. With her current scholarship, she's got the homeschool scholarship. It's called PEP in Florida. It's an ESA, meaning a universal ESA scholarship, meaning she's qualifies just by virtue of being in Florida, and she's registered as a homeschooler under PEP. The Personalized Education Plan is the name of the scholarship. So it's the one for homeschoolers that it covers almost everything except for vision therapy and OT because she's not on the scholarship for kids with unique abilities. So she now needs to apply for that scholarship. I'm not going to risk losing it though, because once you get approved for I've already been approved for next year for the PEP. So I have to wait till next year when the application's open to apply for the unique ability scholarship, which will give me access to be able to spend money on vision therapy and OT and all of those types of services. Right now, I'm restricted to just using it for reading tutoring. Those services are incredibly expensive. It's $2,500 for a 6-week session of vision therapy, for example. OT is $125 a session because we're going to do equine assisted. We live in the country and that's what's nearby. But those types of things would be completely unaffordable for an average person, especially in a rural area, without that unique ability scholarship, or reading tutoring without the PEP scholarship. Reading tutoring is like, it's equine assisted too. So it's another $125 a session, but it doesn't have to be that expensive. It's usually $60 to $80 a session. So that's the types of things that this scholarship is life-changing for, because it's going to help those students that would otherwise not get those needs met or have to have them pushed off until parents could save up for it, or they could get it through some state level services and it just wouldn't be as high quality. Now, like, we're able to find the best possible service providers, and either they're already on Step Up as a provider and we can just pay directly from the scholarship, or I can submit the invoice for reimbursement once I get on that UA scholarship. But for everyone else, like, this is, I think, incredibly life-changing for those families that have children with special needs, and for the lower income families that are homeschooling in the rural areas. They can get high quality online virtual tutors. So that's another thing. They can attend even virtual micro schools. So if they have a working parent and that parent needs them in some sort of childcare as well as academically, my good friend Iman runs Kind Academy, and that has a full online school through OutSchool with live teachers, and they can pay for their schooling through the scholarships, through the PEP scholarship, the homeschool one. So now you've got your child in full-time online school at home with high quality education, socially, emotionally intelligent teachers that really care about individualized education. And it's really neat. Like, I think that's the biggest deal, is that you have complete control over individualized education for your kid, and those special needs and unique things that you would never be able to get met in public school or even in like the more expensive private schools, because they just don't have the ability to meet those
and have the resources.
Yeah, and that's totally understandable.
Awesome.
So
Very, very cool. Okay, so I'm going to shift over to Becky because dealing with compliance and all of that, especially with nonprofits, what do you see families need to consider before using these funds, especially when it comes to compliance oversight and maintaining their educational freedom? I know this is a really big issue within the ESAs, and just all of the funding options is the government oversight. And like with Heather saying, it gives the opportunity to have these great options. However, we then see the issue of the freedom side, and how do we keep our freedom? Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest, I think, topics or topics of conversation that comes into play around these, if not the biggest, because it's the, if we're taking with government funds come government regulation. There's that saying that I was listening to some things by Ed Choice the other day and enjoyed hearing Robert Enlow as the president of Ed Choice, and he just was like, that has not been proven to be true yet. So I don't know, maybe I swing somewhere in the middle, because there is no getting around, if you're going to take any type of these fundings, whether it's ESA or voucher or tax credit scholarship, depending on your state and depending on what it is, there is going to be a measure of oversight. Some of them are more regulated than others. And Heather could probably get into that a little bit more than I could. I'm in Oregon where we have charter schools, and it's really exciting that we have charter schools, but like, that's it. So I know what I know from, being intentional about learning and then working with founders across the country. So I have some exposure, but I don't get to do all this fun stuff myself. So the oversight can look different depending on the state and depending on where the money's coming from. If you're using some type of digital wallet or reimbursement system, then obviously you're uploading some type of receipt, or and then there are situations where if you're questioned, or depending on, again, the state, you may need to upload a curriculum connection or a picture of the science experiment that you did where you purchased the materials for that. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on, but it is helpful for families to kind of know going into it, if you're going to accept these funds, then you are going to be accountable to some degree. And so I think, first of all, just make sure that you know and understand what the requirements are, like what is allowed and what isn't. If you're in a state where maybe it is a little bit more free and you can purchase things using a digital wallet and there's not heavy accountability on that, then there are families that, whether knowingly or unknowingly, are perhaps abusing the funds by purchasing things that aren't educational. They can't be proven educational, and they genuinely were like vacuum cleaners. And unless your kid's going to take it apart and build it, but then you like take a picture so you can demonstrate, you know what I mean? Like, but it's important that you know and understand what the limitations are. So take the time to learn. Again, it's going to look different for every program. So take the time to learn and figure out what that is. And then compliance, I work with nonprofits, and so we do a lot of tax documentation. And so I'm a little more on the field of like, compliance is not always a bad thing. And we're in this arena with all of these, founders and parents where we're like, freedom. And I'm really big on that too, but there's got to be a balance in there somewhere. And if everyone is abusing the system, abusing the funding, and not focusing on compliance, then it can be a detriment to the program. And the goal would be to try to work together with the legislatures and the people writing these policies so that it can be something that can work long term. Catherine Bathgate is in Utah, and she's a microschool founder, but she's also she works pretty heavily in policy and works with Ed Choice as a policy advisor. So she wrote a paper recently that you can find on Ed Choice's website, and she also has a podcast where she is the guest and she speaks kind of about her thoughts on that. And she talks about her take on it is trying to find and suggest ways for the government to have oversight where it is not overreaching or it's not unbearable. So she suggests some really interesting things and a couple really interesting approaches that at one glance would be like, you're suggesting that they monitor in all these different ways. And she's like, yeah, but they're going to do it anyways. So here's the way that it could work. So if you're interested, I love she definitely has a lot of sway. And so I love that she put that out and is really trying to push some really healthy ways of having accountability without it being overbearing. So, but I guess in summary on this point, it would just be for parents to know going into it that there is going to be a measure of compliance required. And if that's not your thing, then this may not be your thing. Because it's not the best for the program and for the other families that are benefiting from it and the children that are benefiting from it, to have people just totally misuse and abuse the thing as a whole. So
yeah, no, and just so to back up on that as well, and the compliance could be, okay, you have to make sure they're doing the state testing, or you have to, like in Florida, I really like they had you do something with a teacher just to get it looked at, like they're just observing
right.
and then checking your work, and then you get, yes, they've improved. And it's literally just a simple paper that says this, and you turn that in, and it's not very challenging. It's not a test. Now I know there's some more stringent testing that that is required for certain funds, and maybe Heather can share that next. But I definitely think that parents, like you said, need to pay attention to, okay, what is it that I'm signing up for, and do I know what is required of me, because it does have implications as to what your child will be responsible to do or not. And Heather posted some websites, so we'll be putting those down in the show notes below as well. So Heather, just to go back, I know we talked briefly about some of these different types of ESAs within each state program. When we're talking about like within the compliance side, can you share a little bit, like with Florida, what they have to do versus, I don't know what Arizona has or what Texas is going to have, but they're all going to look different. Can you share a little bit about that element?
Do you mean for families or for vendors
Yes.
and providers?
For families, I think, and then we can do for providers, but I really want to focus on what families are required to do, because we need to understand that yes, we have the freedom to choose or not to choose, but we also need to understand, like, okay, Tennessee, we're getting a voucher, I think. I don't even know what it's called, if it's an ESA or a voucher, but we're going to have to do state testing, and we're not actually going to be considered homeschoolers. So in Florida, that's not the case. And I don't think in Texas that's the case. So it's going to look so different.
Yeah.
I think that's
Actually,
a little stressful.
Tennessee has education freedom scholarship that it's universal, and you're getting 7,000 a year, but priority goes to low income and disability students, 20,000 initial slots.
So 20,000 slots for like how many students there are that homeschool. That's just, the tip of the iceberg, which makes it like it's not even fair to offer it.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you can share a little bit about Florida and what their even? I know you have
Yeah.
some other, yeah, go ahead.
Totally. So basically every dollar must have a clear documented educational purpose for that specific scholarship student. If you're in doubt, you should document it or don't spend it.
Right.
Typically or definitely every program has a handbook that shows you exactly what you can spend and how you can spend it. But I don't think parents take the time to read the handbooks. But what I love to do is upload the handbook into Claude or ChatGPT, and then along with the item that I would like to use it on and say, is this approved? And I don't just assume that it knows that. I always upload the actual current year handbook and say, like, will this be approved? I have this scholarship for my child who's this age, and this is the type of education she does, like whether it's homeschool, private school, whatever. And I give it as much context as possible. And then if you're still not sure, then I would call the scholarship directly or do their chat. A lot of them have one-on-one chat bots and live humans that you can talk to. So just double check with your handbook. And then as far as compliance goes, like outside of like what you can spend the funding on, usually there's going to be annual testing required. The test results need to be uploaded. So like for the homeschoolers in Florida, that's something that a lot of the ones that are like anti-testing would never want to take the scholarship for, but that's only for the PEP homeschool scholarship. If you have the unique abilities one, you're always exempt from testing. So that's another reason to get that ADHD diagnosis or whatever. But then some people don't want to have a diagnosis associated with their child. So then you have that catch-22. So
yes,
the unique ability scholarship is closest to like umbrella schooling, like unschooling, using an umbrella school for unschooling in Florida to be exempt from the testing. That's like if your child qualifies with a unique ability, it exempts you much like the unschooling does if you're associated with an umbrella program. So there's that. You have the annual testing. It's usually due by the end of the school year to be approved for the next school year's funding. And with the private schools, they're all required to do the annual testing as well. The testing can be one of like 20 different tests. I think there's a list of approved standardized tests on each scholarship's website. So with Step Up, like I could choose from the Iowa, the STAR something, or the RAT5, or there's a whole bunch of different choices, and you just have to have it done by a certified teacher, or I think a psychologist is also allowed. So like most of us have in the areas with scholarships, there's a whole bunch of people that operate as portfolio reviewers or exam administrators. Yeah. So they'll also offer portfolio reviews for the families that are exempt that just want to keep track of their students' learning. But yes, that's like become a whole new business basically because it is covered by the scholarships. Those examiners used to charge like $60 to $80. Now they're up to $125. Like for this coming year, that's the same person I've used for the last 3 years. She's gone up $10 to $20 each year. And she used to only do them in person where I had to go meet her at a library. Now they administer them virtually. Which I don't know if it's like as good a quality of as solid results, but this is what's happening because the incentive to grow their business because there's such a high demand is pushing them towards doing virtual administration too. So it's very easy to get those exams is my point. Like they can be virtual and they're funded by your scholarship typically. And if the other thing, one of the qualifiers for the UA is that you need to have for the unique abilities or those with special needs scholarships, is that you need to have either a IEP 504 from a public school, but if your kid's never been in public school like my daughter, you need a neuropsych eval with a qualifying diagnosis, and that has to be given by a psychologist or psychiatrist. And I'm just learning all of that stuff because I've not experienced that yet. So I have one of those neuropsych evals, and that is reimbursable by the UA scholarship once she gets it. But right now I have to pay out of pocket and then save that invoice until I can get in that scholarship. Yeah. And I don't know if they'll reimburse it a year later actually, but whatever. It's a $1,400 exam and
they're not cheap.
They're not cheap.
So, and with the testing, do the students have to hit a certain number, or do they just want the
No.
testing done?
They just want it done, and they don't need to like be at a certain grade level. They don't have to have a certain number. I think my fear with it is that they're going to use it to either further dismantle all of the Department of Ed to show the scores are showing that this is working and that the schools have failed the children. Or they're going to use it to, or both, they're going to use it to tie more requirements to outcomes. Like, so if your child's not excelling, then maybe you don't get renewed for funding, or like if they're not
That's our
improving
concern.
year over year, maybe you get more restricted funding, or maybe you should get more funding because your child needs more support. I don't know. But I'm concerned that it's going to be used against families eventually, and that we are the guinea pigs. And I do not love the idea that we have to submit annual exams, but that is the biggest compliance item for the private schoolers and the homeschoolers. Only the special needs kids are exempt from that. So,
Right.
and
Okay.
that's pretty much standard across the US as far as the requirements for testing. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I forgot. I don't, like for private schools, there's a minimum number of days that they must be enrolled, just like public schools,
Right.
based
And we have to-
based on grade level, and that's a DOE requirement. So I think that's going to be pretty similar across the US.
Yes.
Um,
Like that's one of our only things here in Tennessee
Yeah.
is attendance records
yeah,
that are main.
for private schools, right? Not for homeschoolers or anything, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's for if you are an independent homeschooler and not
Okay.
an umbrella. Now, technically, you're supposed to. Anyways, there's a few
Yes, we have
umbrellas
that
that
same
don't
thing with
require it,
umbrella.
but you have to keep it and have it on record.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the main things from the state that is required. So, and these are the kind of things that you find out with your handbooks and when
Yeah.
you join. And this is where like associations can come into play to help you do all of these things.
Yeah.
Or you can use Claude or AI because it's apparently going to take over teachers too, because
I
humanoids
saw the
just came out.
robots. Yeah,
So
I saw that.
okay,
Um,
had to put that up in there because I know there's going to be a lot of talk about that. Okay, all right, so we're gonna switch roles, and Kimberly is going to be asking our questions for our service provider questions because she is helping service providers with HCN. And maybe Kimberly, just share a little bit about, because I didn't get to introduce you, but I was waiting for this moment so you could share a little bit about HSN and HCN, and then like what you do, as your role is very important.
Well, thank you, Tiffany. I do appreciate you taking the time, and thank you, Heather and Becky, for being here as well. I'm Kimberly Bennett. I'm a licensed professional counselor of over 20 years. I've been a homeschooling mama for the past 7, and I'm a nonprofit founder. I'm still a licensed counselor, but I didn't want to do direct care service anymore. So instead, I launched a nonprofit, the Homeschool Counseling Network. What I found in my time as a homeschool parent is homeschoolers need services. They need allied health, mental health, coaching, consulting services, testing, all of that jazz, but they're not able to find providers who truly understand them and their culture and their world. So I created a nonprofit to help train providers who want to come work with homeschoolers. Then we include them in our directory. We also have a ton of free resources and advocacy and support for homeschool families at HCN. So that's a little bit about what I do. So I kind of serve 2 camps, if you will. I provide all the resources for the homeschool families, but also train the providers so they can turn around and serve the homeschool community well. So that's how I ended up working with providers and with the school choice movement that's here in Texas, which is still brand new. The applications are still open. A lot of all the things that you guys have talked about earlier, we're still coming down the pipeline here in Texas. So I'm going to say stay tuned for that. But as a part of that, I have both families wanting to look into how they can apply for these scholarship funds. At the same time, I have providers wanting to know how they can become vendors with these SGOs and with all of the other jazz we talked about earlier. So Heather, I'm going to direct this question to you. What does it take to actually become an ESA provider, and what requirements should tutors or microschools or vendors or providers or even co-ops expect when they start to go through this application process?
So much. So again, there's a handbook. for each program. So when you want to go apply to become a provider or a vendor, there's going to be a link on that state's website. So I'm going to use Step Up for Students, for example. There's a vendor link and a provider link, and it says, like, do you want to become a provider? Here are the 3 to 5 steps. And there's an application, there's a description of your services, description of your rates, and proof that you're a business, your EIN, your articles of incorporation, and your banking information, your address where your services will be rendered, and then who's going to be like working in your company. So some people will associate like certified teachers with the company as well, or a psychologist or therapist can be associated with those businesses like separately in their own account as well. There is like a screening process they go through, and typically wait 3 to 4 weeks to get approved. It used to be a few months. And this is just for like products and services, not microschool, like not private schools. Private schools have a whole other list that they have to go through with DOE and Step Up, or whatever ESA program they're working with, because they have to deal with more compliance and legal issues than just becoming approved on Step Up. But for just like your everyday reading tutor, or OT specialist, or gymnastics, or curriculum provider or vendor of a learning product, those have like the application, the proof of business background, like what you're offering, and that your business is established and legal and compliant, and your banking information. And then they just decide whether you qualify under their categories that they've approved. And they'll typically follow up with you with an email saying your categories and your services have been approved, or they've been rejected, and this is why. And you resubmit your paperwork and fix whatever's not done right. So that's it for the simple stuff. But for micro schools, private schools, I went through that, and it was an extensive list of like 21 items. It's on DOE's website to become a private school, and then to become a Step Up approved school. It's quite different. So I had a visit from like the head of the private school scholarship organization. Like at DOE, there was a person in charge of those who wanted to become a Step Up approved private school, basically. And he no longer works in that role, but he did for a few years. And he came down from Tallahassee and did a full walkthrough of my school to make sure that I met all the requirements. After I'd already had a fire inspection, a health inspection, DCF showed up and surprised me and said I was an unlicensed daycare even. And I was like, nope, I'm going to be a private school. And they're like, okay, because I didn't know that I just was running as a homeschool group. And she was like, nope, you need to either be licensed or a private school. And I was like, okay, I guess I'll be a private school. So I got pushed that way. And I was already a nonprofit as well. But I didn't know what I didn't know. Like most founders, we learn the hard way, especially back in 2021. So, and none of these people in these field, like DCF, the fire inspector, the health code, the health inspector, or DOE, none of them agree on what the laws are and what the accurate things are. So I had to teach them a lot of the things that I was having to do. I was like, no, actually, this is what I'm going to do, because look, this is like the fire inspector didn't know I was exempt from sprinklers because I was under 1,000 square feet. He was telling me I had to put $100,000 worth of sprinklers into a building that I rented 2,000 square feet of 10,000 square feet. And I rented 2,000, but I only ran my school in 500 square feet. The rest of it was free co-work space for the community. That was the nonprofit part of it. So there's like all these things that they just don't know. And I found that after reading the National Fire Code for 3 hours one day, just the section that applied to private schools and schools. And I screenshotted it and sent it to him. He was like, oh, okay, I guess you're fine then. But that was after 2 years of operating differently, because he told me I couldn't operate that way. Like it was very frustrating. And then DCF telling me that I needed to be a private school was like, okay, great, I'll be a private school. And like I wish somebody had like written that somewhere. That's not written down anywhere. It just says if you have more than 6 unrelated kids, you need to be a licensed daycare. in Florida like that, but that's not true. You can be a tutoring center, you can be a homeschool enrichment program, or you can be a private school. There's a lot of different options. So
Wow.
yeah, and Texas is going to be dealing with like so much of that because I coached a ton of founders in Kai Pod that were in Texas, and they're making all sorts of partnerships and deals to open more and more micro schools there. So I know that's a big market for new micro school founders, but it's vastly underserved by like support services because everybody's so spread out there, very
Yes.
rural. So yeah, it's really interesting. But yeah, I'm not
It
going to go
is.
into all the private school requirements. There's a lot. So
Well, I would just say kudos to you for having your initiative, because it sounds like, well, with most anything else with government, the left hand never knows what the right hand is doing anyway. So imagine if you had been a founder who did not take the initiative to do that. So that I'll get on into my discussion a little bit later on about why that's important to do your homework and to really know it, because you have to be your own best advocate, really.
yeah, an advocate. Yes. Yeah, that's exactly what you end up turning into.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, that's insane. Well, I'm gonna pivot and switch this question to Becky, but thank you so much for sharing all that you went through, because you never know what future founder you may have just benefited by sharing your story.
Oh, good.
Not, from a place of facts, not from a place of fear, but it definitely can be empowerment. Oh my goodness, that's a lot you went through. I'm glad to see humor's kind of your default setting as well. You're like, well, let's move on from this. Let's just laugh and move on. What's the other options? Uh, Becky, I'm going to redirect this one to you if that's okay. We know that all states have funding available, while some other options to address funding gap for families and founders. And what other options are there for families where there are funding gaps, where there may not be ESA programs? How can families fund these home education or alternative education program pursuits?
Yeah, I love talking about this because, like I said, this is more up my alley. I love talking about all of these things and hearing what's going on across the country. But it's funny, I was at a forum, the National Hybrid Schools Forum that happens in LA in the spring, so February, so late winter. And it was funny because it was really geared towards the West Coast, and there are charter schools in Oregon, Washington, and California, but those are they're limited and they can have caps, and it's hard to even get a school transfer request granted in some areas so that you could even participate in charter school. So it was funny because there is this sense of like almost like we feel left out over here on the West Coast, which makes sense. So I would love to talk about this. I was going to back up just a tiny bit and give a shout out to Yes Every Kid, for founders and people who are starting programs or offering services, especially if you're starting some type of micro or hybrid school, because just like Heather was sharing, it really helps to know if you can before you build your program. Like here in Oregon, if you operate less than 70 days a year, then you aren't really anything. You don't need to be a licensed daycare, you're daycare exempt, but then you also you don't fall under the Department of Education, you're not a school. And so they just leave you alone. And I don't know how long that will live, but there are other states where that's the case too. So if you go into it knowing where you might fit, before you build this whole program, it can save you the headache of like having to pivot 2 years in and be like, I guess we're a school now, and what does that look like? So Yes Every Kid can help founders navigate the different state requirements, the daycare licensing and fire codes
They
and
give you
things like
free
that.
legal aid,
Yes.
like free
Yep.
legal services. That's what you mean. Because I called them often.
Yeah. Good.
They have a
Good.
wonderful.
Yeah. So shout out to them.
Yeah.
HSLDA provides similar services. I don't know that they're quite as available. I had a founder yesterday who was like, they interrogated me when I called, and they were like, who gave you our number and who sent you and what's your program like? So they still offer really. Darren Jones at HSLDA is brilliant. Just he knows all of these things off the top of his head as far as where founders fall in these requirements. So he's a brilliant resource, but I don't know if he's quite as available as Yes Every Kid. So okay,
Right.
I'm sorry to totally like deviate, but
let me
go ahead,
chime
Tiffany.
in right there. So with HSLDA, you have to be a member, I think, and that's where they start interrogating you, because they're like, who are you? And until you're a member, I don't think you have as much access
Yeah, that might be why,
resources?
because he is still speaking to my clients, and most of them are not members. But like his secretary is asking who sent you. So it maybe the reason that he's still speaking to my clients is because they're name dropping. They're like, well, Becky sent me, and Darren and I have kept in touch through the years. So maybe that's where that's coming from.
Yes.
But there are resources out there, and it's worth looking into before you get too neck deep in something. So okay, so these
Absolutely.
other options to address funding gaps, because it's expensive to run any type of program like a hybrid micro school, private school, and the teachers and the people that are running it, administrators, should be paid. Like they should be paid well
Yeah.
for their time. And I have learned some of that the hard way, expecting myself to do some of this really hard work voluntarily, and then you almost set your program up not for failure, but it's challenging to recover that gap of like, well, I wasn't paid our first year because this was just a hobby or an experiment. And then this is a massive full-time job that I'm doing and I need to be paid. Well, then you have to raise tuition significantly.
Yeah.
So ideally, you start out with people being paid and then being paid a fair wage. So that's expensive. Just payroll and contractors and all of that by itself is expensive. And programs in states that don't have any type of ESA or voucher or tax credits or anything like that, how are they supposed to run these programs and still be able to pay their expenses and generate enough revenue? So there's a few things. I always point people to VELA, the VELA Ed Fund, VELA, and VELA has their micro grant season is opened recently, a week or so ago. So they do $10,000 micro grants for programs. You kind of need to have your foot in the door, as not your foot in the door, but like be established. So have a program that is generating revenue and that can show proof of concept. So if you haven't started your program yet, maybe wait and apply for VELA the next year. And then use those funds for operational expenses or, building needs or whatever those needs are to help buffer your budget. So that's a little bit of a one-time fix. They do have some next step and bridge grants that are larger, but those are much more competitive. So not everybody can get access to one of those, but trying to get funding through grant funding and other, fundraising was one of the biggest, like almost a guarantee for our program here in Oregon. We did raffles and gosh, what was some other things that we did? The raffle was by far the biggest one where, we incentivized the students just a little bit. And we ended up raising about $15,000 a year through the raffle. So that was, and there were very little expenses because, you get everything donated beforehand. So fundraising is still a viable option if your options are limited, fundraising is a viable option. But then I did want to talk about, just because you're not in a state with ESAs, vouchers, all those things, it doesn't mean that there could not be a scholarship granting organization, an SGO in your state, or that you could start one. And people, they can't get the same tax credit that they'll be getting with the one starting in 2027, where it literally wipes away your tax liability up to $1,700. But they still get, it reduces their tax liability because it's a tax deduction. So if you can get people to donate to an SGO in one of these non-ESA states, then that SGO could still grant scholarships, financial aid, funding, all kinds of these same types of things to programs in the area. It would need to be run correctly. Decisions would need to be made at arm's length with accountability. So there's a lot of resources on the web to make sure you're starting an SGO correctly. But that is something that could be done. And I had mentioned to Tiffany a while ago that there's some of us founders over on the West Coast are to the point where we are considering investing some of our time into doing that, putting together an SGO that could provide, take in funding and provide scholarships for students to attend hybrid microschools. And it would have to operate somewhat similarly to the government funded ones, because you'd have to have approved vendors, you'd have to have accountability, you'd have to have a lot of those same things in place, and they would be self-imposed because not a government program. But to be an SGO, you need to be a nonprofit, you need to be a 501c3, So ultimately, you're still accountable to the government. But that was something that had jumped out to me. Gosh, there's a gal, and now I'm totally blanking on her name, but oh, she's
Lizette?
starting something. She's in LA, and she's starting something called Founding Beyond Funding.
Lizette.
Yes,
Lizette.
thank you. I
Lizette
was like,
Belly.
how am I not remembering her name? Don't tell her I couldn't. Good night.
No, it's okay.
Um,
I'm working with her on that.
Yay. So
Yeah.
Lizette's in LA, and maybe you could speak a little bit more to what she's doing. I'm kind of in the loop, but I haven't been able to make the last couple sessions. So Founding Beyond Funding is Lizette's kind of baby, her effort to find ways to bridge this funding gap for these non-ESA states. So hop online, find Founding Beyond Funding, and get more information about how you can support that effort. Because I do think she has a lot of momentum behind that, and it's a valid thing that she's doing, and she's brilliant. So I'm a big advocate of that. And then the last thing would just be to reach out to your legislators, to your governors. In Oregon, our governor was like, came out really early on when the governors were saying whether or not they were going to accept the tax credit scholarship in their state, the one that starts in 2027. And our governor was one of the first ones to come out at all. And she was like, no, we will not be participating. And so I don't know how much it's going to make a difference, but like we should be reaching out to our legislators and our governors and giving them personal stories and personal impact and sharing with them, because they do need to hear from their constituents. Otherwise, you don't even come to mind if they're not aware. So that might be more of a long-term goal, but it is something that we could be doing to help bridge the gap in the long run.
It makes a huge difference. I used to go to those meetings with legislators in Tallahassee with the different, what are they called? PACs, the different groups that lobby for the bills to be passed. So I got to be part of the families or the founders. They invited 5 of us across the state of Florida to help convince legislators to pass HB1 so that we could have universal access. So it was really cool. And I brought my daughter to all of that, and they put us up in hotels, and we got to sit through the hearings, listening to like who was for and against. And I mean, a lot of it was all brand new to me. I was only in my 2nd year of being a microschool founder, but that was how I got to know like Shireen with Colossal Academy, and Allison Rennie with Star Lab. I think she's in Naples. Star Lab is south of me. So Sarasota, that's where she is. And then I learned about Iman with Kind Academy, and we've all become friends over the years now. And it's really neat when you get involved with the political side as a founder, not a politician, but as the founder, when you're sharing your story and you share your students' stories. So
I think we should be doing more of that for sure.
For sure. Yes. And we have a unique position of like power, where they actually do listen to our experience, because we have so much access to these families that they care about, or they run a campaign that says that they care about it. So it's really neat if you can get in their offices. So
cool.
And what Lizette is doing is she's building a blueprint and practical toolkit for founders and families who are founding, those who are founding and those who are finding new learning models. I'm reading off what she sent to me. So they're going to be publishing a national insights brief that surfaces patterns, lessons, and pathways for the broader field as well. So it's really neat what she's doing.
So there are some options.
There are, and there's nothing quite like the possibility. And I love how homeschool families and parents come together, because if there's not a way, we're going to make a way.
Oh, heck yeah.
And Tiffany, I think you may have just found your next podcast guest. I think you need to reach out to Lizette.
And I've heard from both of them. So Lizette, if you're listening, you're coming next. And so I want to quickly say something, Becky, about the political side of this for nonprofits. As Kimberly and I have spoken about on several occasions, there is a way to do it, but you have to have the right tax code to be able to politically be involved.
You can do, so even as a 501c3, you can do what's considered an insignificant amount of political lobbying. So there, just like everything else, the IRS rarely, if ever, defines insignificant. So this
Okay.
the CPA that I worked with, I think she says like 5%. So if you looked at everything you did for that year and tried to come up with some really rough numbers of like, we spent thousands of hours doing our educational program, and we spent 15 hours at the Capitol sharing the stories of our students that need ESA funding and why. Well, that would look very insignificant if you were ever questioned or audited. But a lot of people don't know this. And so either they'll try to report you for being non-compliant, or they'll question you. And this happens in churches where if a pastor mentions anything political or any type of legislative bill, people in the church will lose their minds because like, you're going to get in trouble, you can't do that. It's like, no, you can do an insignificant amount of political lobbying. That's what the IRS 501c3 code says. However, you cannot do any political advocacy for people running for office. So candidates, you cannot do any support or opposition for specific candidates.
So that doesn't include
So
bills.
yes, there are. What's that?
That doesn't include the bills that we're talking about that
No,
pass or don't
those are
pass.
two.
Okay.
Yeah, so bills are considered lobbying, and then the candidates, people running for office are candidates. So those are two separate things. There are political advocacy nonprofits, and they have all the same benefits of being a 501c3 with the exception that donations are not tax deductible. So it's ideal to be a 501c3 if you qualify, but if you really do want to do a significant amount of political lobbying or you want to be able to support or oppose candidates, then you need to be, and again, blanking, but it's like I think it's 501c4.
Yeah.
That's what I was gonna say. 501c4. You're like picking into parts of my brain that I haven't accessed in a little while. So 501c4 is a political organization. So you still have the benefits of tax exemption and things like that. And we need 501c4s. There is one that I worked with in Florida a couple of years ago. Oh my goodness, she's the one that her name is Brenda Dickinson, and she was one of the first lobbyers for homeschool legislation in Florida, like 30 years ago.
She's famous
And
here.
yeah, I was gonna say, I'm sure you
yeah.
know her name.
Yeah.
So I worked with them and helped them form a nonprofit that was adjacent because they have their 501c4, and then they wanted to do some activities that were separate from that. So I helped them form that, but it was so fun to hear about her history and all the work that they have done with their political advocacy group. Yeah, we do. We need more of those as well.
Yes. And Becky is more than able to help you get that going, so that way we can have more helpers and
yes,
be a larger voice.
Yeah.
Kimberly, did you have any more questions?
I do. I have one more for Becky, if that's okay. So how can providers
Absolutely.
strategically use ESA programs to grow their services, but also while maintaining quality, sustainability, and alignment with their values? Because sometimes it feels like those two things can be in opposition with one another.
Right. Yeah. And similar to what we spoke about, families really considering, do I want to participate in this program? Am I willing to operate in compliance? Am I willing to be held accountable for how I'm using these funds? It is important that founders and providers and vendors, depending on what state you're in, it's important that you're evaluating the same thing, like pause before you just dive right in and start taking money, and make sure that you have read the handbook, that you understand what are the requirements for you to be successful under this program. So that would be one way to really make sure you understand it, and that you're willing to comply and really determine, is this going to require me to compromise? And sometimes there's an issue of like religious materials. Well, we're not going to cover religious materials, and there are programs that will rewrite the curriculum or reevaluate the curriculum that they're going to be using because they want to be able to use the funding to pay for curriculum. So they may change the curriculum approach so that they can use ESA funds to purchase those things. But there might be founders and or families that aren't willing to do that. So you kind of have to know going into it, what are the limitations going to be? Am I going to be okay with that? But then also what has happened, and I think Heather may have mentioned this, I don't remember if it was in this recording or before, but pricing changes, and that can cause some significant issues because service providers and vendors will be in a state where all of this money is flowing and families all of a sudden have thousands of dollars that they can pay for all of these services. And they, the supply demand thing drives prices up. And
Mhm.
like, does that really align with your values? Is that really what we're in this for? Regardless
Right.
of whether it does or not, what that does is it penalizes the families that either choose not to or cannot access these funds. Because even families who either don't qualify or don't qualify because of income levels or don't qualify because there are just so many people in the state that need access to that program, you're going to price them out of being able to participate in your program. And it really skews the general idea of like what's accepted and what type of pay and fee structure is acceptable for the variety of programs. So I would caution vendors and service providers to be aware of, like, just because these 10 families have, a combination of $100,000 between them, we could charge this astronomical amount, or even not astronomical, but like exorbitant. That may not be the best approach. And to really be cognizant of what is important, what was the original mission, and not let the dollar signs, like flood into your eyeballs
Right.
and take over all your sense of rationale. So those are the main things that jumped out to me. Heather may have some thoughts on that one too.
Yeah, I have a few. Because on the flip side, after working with founders nationwide, most of them undercharge. And
Yeah.
I'm talking about for micro schools, learning centers, private tutoring. Those women are typically coming from public schools or they're homeschool moms with zero business background and big imposter syndrome and way underestimating their value and worth. And the vendors and the big ed tech companies, or not the one I work for, actually, it's very low price, but the other companies that I've seen are like the franchises, and those are going up for sure. But the everyday women like you and I that are opening programs just out of need, like our own individual need and our community's needs, are usually grossly undervaluing themselves and undercharging. So like my program was like, I think it was like $7,000 a year at first. The state average was 12,000 in Florida. And I was in a very high income area. Like, this, Tiffany, because you're from the same area, Dunedin, Florida. I grew to 10,000 a year, and I was so anxious to raise my rates. I was so like, oh, they're gonna think I want to earn money. Oh, what weird. It's so weird that I
How
want
dare
to earn
you?
money. And like I wasn't even paying myself until the third year. And I paid myself like $2,500 a month. Like it was barely anything to survive where I lived. Like my rent, the rent in that area was about $2,500 for a 2-1. It's extremely high. So I worked another full-time job, which is also very common in the founder space, just to keep my school running. And because I had overhead, I had 2 teachers and an assistant, and I had 15 students, but I paid the teachers too much and I paid me too little. I also probably overhired because I was really wanting to have that like really low ratios. But I probably could have been just fine with just 2. I didn't need 2.5, and because I had an assistant plus 2 full-time teachers. And I didn't need credentialed teachers either. That's another thing that people are very surprised by in the private school space. And you like for tutoring, yes, if you have a tutoring center. Sorry, the sun is setting and I'm gonna close my blinds because I'm getting blinded. But like tutoring spaces, you have to have a credentialed teacher. But for private schooling, you do not need a certification. So my best teacher that I had was actually was not certified. She just had teaching experience in the grade levels we were teaching. And that was, I needed 3 years of that experience for her to be able to be a part of my step up accepting program. So DOE didn't care if she had 3 years of experience, but step up cares. If you're going to be a step up accepting private school, you have to have at least 3 years experience and a bachelor's degree. Or a bachelor's degree, I think, actually, and or a teaching certificate. So it's not as difficult to have staff, is my point. And they don't need to be very high credentials. You don't need to compete with the teacher salary that they're leaving the school system for, because you're giving them so much flexibility. You're reducing their workload. They're not taking home a bunch of work after school. They're not doing a ton of lesson planning. I prepped all of my lesson for my teachers in advance. Everything was it was Blossom and Root. So I don't know if anybody has used Blossom and Root, but it's a really beautiful program built by women in Denver, Colorado. It's a homeschool curriculum that I asked her for permission to use at my micro school at scale. And everything is like spelled out exactly what you need each week. It's made for parents to use at home, and it's using products that you would find around your home. It was nature-based, child-led, very Reggio friendly. And my program was like, we spent half the day outside. That was a big draw of it. So it was a lot of outdoor learning and outdoor play. But it doesn't have to be you don't have to have a ton of like high, overhead for staff is the thing. And you should pay yourself first. There's a great book that talks about this. It's called Profit First. And I started reading that like a little bit into my journey, and it's all about like, you must take the profit first before you pay anything else. You need even if it's $1, just to train your brain that you have value, and that if without you, the business fails. And I saw that in my experience. Like, I was killing myself to keep this business open, working a whole second job. And then the church was going to be selling the building I was in. So then I started trying to network and find somebody to partner with. And my teachers were having their own issues because I had quickly hired the wrong people in the last 6 months that I was open. I had hired for credentials and I had overpaid them. And then I'm stressing about trying to buy the building. And then I'm also working full time out in the field and remote. It was a lot. But my program kept getting bigger. It kept doubling each year. So that's the thing, is that these programs are little but mighty, and they have really good returns if you don't overhire or you don't have too much rent. My rent was pretty fair for where I was because I was renting from a church. A lot of us will find reasonable rent, or we'll start in our homes, so you have very low overhead there. But that imposter syndrome really screws with how you hire,
how much you pay,
and how much you pay and how much you take personally. So what I've learned after the last 6 years of doing this is niche down, because I've done a lot of really, really high quality business coaching. I've spent thousands on professional business coaching over the last 10 years. And I've gone to entrepreneurial cohorts, the Jim Moran Institute. It's a big one that's hosted by the University of Florida. So I attended that 2 years ago too. And what I always hear repeated is niche down. So if you're in the microschool world or tutoring or homeschool enriching or whatever you're offering, you have to find your niche. And so for me, it's girls ages 5 to 12. That's all I want to teach now. And I don't teach explicitly. I do social emotional learning, and it is child-led. And that's it. That's all I'm interested in doing right now. And it's been so much better than when I did K through 6, full academics, full time. I only do it 2 days a week, 3 hours a day. So that's my daughter's like homeschool enrichment program. That's her social group. It's 6 girls, 6 hours a week. And I love it. Like, it's so simple and so beautiful. And it's so true to me. So like, I finally found something that brings me joy, brings in a decent like base side income or whatever. And you can grow from there. You don't have to start off as a full-time program. You can start with just 2 days or 3 days. Right. And you can supplement with a co-op day, like a community co-op that's out at a local park. It doesn't always need to be in your house. I caution against doing anything full-time in your house. I started the first year in my house, and it was the last year of my marriage. So it was like very stressful those last 6 months. And I didn't start it knowing that it was going to be my last year of marriage, but I went into it like feeling stressed already. So if you already have like stress at home and you try to add a business to it, it only magnifies that. So I definitely caution against putting anything in your home that is but that your partner might not be on board with. My partner was on board, but then as we got divorced, he made it more difficult. So it's always good to have everybody on the same page and be like super flexible with moving locations if you need to, and having people in your business that believe in it as fully as you do. So if I were to build a school again, I would do it with somebody else. Doing it all by yourself is a lot. It's mentally draining, having parents put all their pressure and stress on you too. Like they're also anxious. A lot of them were public school switchers, or it was their first school. They're coming from doing pre-K at home to just starting, and they were the most anxious parents. So that, coupled with some imposter syndrome, is very overwhelming. So that's why I love what I do now. It's just so laid back. I work full-time remote, and I have my little girls group 6 hours a week, and it's beautiful. So
I think what you mentioned too with that is that you're not making your school your main source of income. And that's something that we really want to stress to not only founders, but even like the service providers that are going to come into the homeschool space. Don't just base all of your main source of income in this industry. We do it because we have a heart for it, not because it necessarily pays all the bills, because like what has been stated is, you know, you've got this influx of people coming in, and not everybody's going to have all the funding to cover everything. So you've got to be really reasonable and just do the hours that you can actually do and charge right for that. And don't worry about the rest of it, which I think is kind of where we're going with that, because you're now happier. It is where you're best fit, but you're also still able to serve the industry at large with your other job that you're doing. So, right.
And you also need to realize that like the scholarships only existed in the last couple of years. So families paid for these services without the scholarships, and the families in the states without scholarships are paying for these types of services still, because good quality education or good quality products families will pay for, whether they have to drive far, save a lot of money up for it, or they have to borrow from grandparents. Like they'll do anything to get their kids' needs met, if they're the type of family that's going to use these funds in your program. So
which is the ones you want.
The ones that you would attract and want anyways. Bella doesn't want you to have only scholarship income. Like that's not a stable business model to them. So they expect you to have cash pay families. And the Bella grants are $2,500, $5,000, or $10,000. Most people I know get the $2,500 or $5,000. The $10,000 one's a little bit more rare. And once you've gotten a scholarship, you can apply for the second round, which is $50,000. And then there's also Camelback, which is a $50,000 one with a cohort. And there's a couple others that I don't really
put them on the show notes if you can remember them and send them to me.
More shady and they feel icky. So like that Camelback, Bella. I will send them out for sure.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. And then Kimberly, we're going to end with you, because we've got to figure out, you know, how these service providers are also coming into play here. What would you say are the key responsibilities and trade-offs providers need to understand, including administration, compliance, and potential impacts on their program's freedom or mission? Because we know, like we just found out with all these things, there's a lot of compliance that can come into play.
I'm going to try to be as succinct as I can. I'm just going to go back to, who is it, Spider-Man's Uncle Ben, when he's like, with great power comes great responsibility. And it's just, we touched on so much of it during today's talk, and such a wonderful chat. You know, the world of homeschooling is filled with so many different layers, and it's such a beautiful tapestry that we are. But for service providers, it's a trade-off. We talked about this a lot when you come in here. It's, if you're going to provide services, you're going to need to do a needs assessment and to know what services your customer, because that's basically what homeschool families are, your customer is looking for. That's part of the part of the piece of the pie. The other part of it is, if you're going to be a vendor or a service provider, you've got to make sure that you're in compliance with the state's requirements. You've got to make sure you're in compliance with the SGO, or with the scholarship granting organization, or the voucher system, whatever, who's approving you as a vendor. You have to follow in line with what their criteria are. That means you might have administrative work that you might have to keep up with, from invoicing to documentation, attendance, or service tracking. You might have background checks, reporting requirements, all of the different things that these two ladies mentioned throughout. There's going to be different hoops you have to jump through, different I's you got to dot, and different T's you have to cross. So you're going to have a trade-off there. You're going to sacrifice some of that autonomy so that you can be in line with their requirements. Things like data privacy, you're going to have to comply with FERPA or HIPAA, depending on what service you're providing, whether that's mental health, allied health, or whether that's just micro school and educational records. That you're going to have to comply with one or both of those. And so bottom line is that you need to understand that your mission may have to change with what it was that how you originally wanted to start when you originally came into this world as a service provider or vendor. And you're going to have to see if you can handle the capacity for that. You talked, Heather, about how this is not your full-time job. You have another full-time job that you do to support this, not relying on this as your sole income, but then also what boundaries can you set there? We know as business owners, you will work harder for yourself than you will ever work for anybody else, even when it is something that you love as much as you love when you're doing this. So you have to be sure that you're being flexible enough to meet those expectations that are required of you, but also that you're setting enough boundaries in order to take care of yourself if you're going to be successful in this.
Right, right. And I would even go to say, you know, these compliances are constantly changing, like we're finding out now. More regulations are coming out, more governments within the state side are coming into, okay, well, what kind of offerings are we going to have for our students? What kind of school choice? Because they are lobbying for school choice because they want to take over a lot of what we currently have now as freedom within homeschooling. But we are trying to say, okay, well, can we draw the line and say, right, you've got your public sector, and then you have your private sector that doesn't accept all these funds. But with that, you know, you've got to kind of have a direction of what you want to do within your own business, so you know how you can serve maybe both of those industries and those needs. And then real quick, we know that we have all enjoyed being in this space, and like everyone has stated, it can be overwhelming. It can be, you know, there's so many questions that we cannot answer, and we've mentioned so many different resources. They will be in the show notes. As best as I can remember, I was jotting them down as we were going, so we'll make sure they get to you. But if you have a question or you need anything, you have 4 resources here. Becky's great with nonprofits. Heather is great with founders. Kimberly is great with service providers. So you have those resources to latch onto and ask the questions. And we are so thankful that we have our guests joining us today. Our goal really is just to help you feel confident as you're navigating these decisions, because you just want to create the best possible learning environment for your child. So we hope that this episode has helped you to make sure that, you know, you share this with any other families that you have seen that are looking in this space of homeschooling or school choice or what have you. Have them share, subscribe. We would love to get as many as can watch this out and about, because we want to make sure we're getting wholesome information and not just like one-sided. We're really trying to just give you all the information so you can make your own decisions. But I just want to go back and say thank you to all of our guests. Thank you, Becky and Heather and Kimberly. It has been such a pleasure having you on, and we will be continuing with our next episode, talking more about our ESA funds. So happy homeschooling, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Okay.